Okay, welcome to chapter 24. What we're going to be talking about is imperialism and Europe's interactions with the rest of the world between 1750 and 1900, 1750 and 1900. So chapter 23 talked primarily about what was going on in Europe, almost exclusively. It was the age of revolutions in Europe. But Europe extends its influence, its power greatly during this time period. So, and that is called imperialism, where they are turning themselves into an empire, thus the name imperialism. Okay, they're becoming imperial. So, England's going to brag during this time that the sun never sets on the British Empire, that their empire extends all over the world. And that's really true right before World War One. You're going to learn in the next time period, World War One changes all that, but that's for the future. Um, why does Europe extend its influence on the rest of the world? What motivates it? And why is it able? Why are they able to be successful? Well, in the early 1800s, Europe expanded their imperial holdings. That's my questions. Why were the Europeans able to be so successful? Number one, industrialization. We're going to come back to that again and again. It gave them both motive, industrialization gave motive and ability. Motive and ability. Okay? Steamships, railways, put everyone in the reach of European land grab. Europe had not gone into the interior of Africa until this time period. You may say, why not? They were down there for the slave trade. Yes, but if you remember the slave trade, they just came into ports at the coast, purchased slaves, and left. They did not dominate the area, at least not until the 1800s. So why not? Why don't they go inland into Africa? Well, they can't ride horses into inland Africa because sub-Saharan Africa has something called the tsetse fly, which kills horses. And so they don't have steamships, steam engines, so they don't have the ability to go inland. When they get those railway steamships, they can move. And Europe, by the Industrial Revolution, no longer feels threatened by anyone else. One of the things you're going to learn is, yes, the Europeans are strong. They've got weapons, they've got fast ships, they've got technological advances, but they're also aided by what's going on in the rest of the world. In other words, the Mughal dynasty in India, on the decline. The Qing dynasty in China, on the decline. Okay, so we're going to see all this plays a role. Now, what's the shift to land empires in Asia? What I mean by land empires in Asia is the idea that we're just not sailing into ports, buying and selling stuff and sailing back to Europe or dropping it off in India. But Europeans are actually moving in to stay. The two big examples we look at are the Dutch in Java and the British in India. All right, so initially, this seems to be the pattern. Initially, the Dutch pay tribute to the rulers of the island of Java to let them stay. They negotiate. And the Dutch East India Company, for the most part, works cooperatively initially. But then, as you can look at that little map of the island of Java and see, Java is divided up into a lot of different smaller kingdoms, principalities, if you will. And these principalities, kingdoms, come into conflict with each other. They'll fight each other. And the Dutch will get involved in this. What they'll do is they'll back one sultan against another sultan in order to help him defeat him. And once the sultan they're backing wins, what do they want? They want some land. And they keep doing this over and over again until eventually the biggest landholder on the island of Java is the Dutch. And then they find it relatively easy to move in and finish them off. And by the 1750s, they had moved from just trading in Java to actually controlling the island of Java. They also do the same thing in India, the British do. Now, the British face something a little different. The Dutch don't really have another European rival when they go for the island of Java. By the way, you might say, why do they want the island of Java? spices. But the British have not only the native Indians to deal with when they try to come into India, but also before the 7 Years' War, they've got the French. Okay. Remember, the 7 Years' War was between 1756 and 1763. And in that time period, the British will win, for the most part, win the war. And when they win the war, one of the things they get out of the war is India. So initially, what I've got again, it's done same. Number one is initially it's done by the British East India Company. The East India Company is a great way, and you're going to read about this, is a great way for the British government to make money and not have to put themselves at risk. What they say to the British East India Company is, you've got our backing, you've got our support, anything you want to do is legal. Do you want your own money? Sure. You want your own soldiers? Sure. Just give us a cut. So the British East India Company knows that they've pretty much got carte blanche. They can do anything they want as long as they give some of their cut to the British government. All right. Later on, they'll back territorial claims between rival princes. Unlike the Dutch, however, the British government does face the other European rivals in the French. So you might say, okay, Mr. McKernan, I look at a map of India, and I know that today India is the second most populated country in the world behind China. And I've seen maps of England and the British, Great Britain, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. They're not that big. How can they control all of India? Excellent question. Well, some of it has to do with what's going on in India. Obviously, the British have great armaments, great ships, but it's more than just that. Number one there, the Hindus and the Muslims don't unite under a national identity. There's been a rivalry between Hindus and Muslims in India for a long time. And they don't unite together. Plus, India is very diverse ethnically. We have a tendency to think of it kind of in a monolithic sense, like it's all the same. It's not. It's not. It's not. So these different groups around India can't unite, and the religious groups can't unite, which gives the British a real advantage. Plus, the British will hire some Indians, we call them sepoys, S-E-P-O-Y, to work in their army. In fact, at one point, there'll be 5 Indian sepoys for every British soldier in the army, not just in India, but in the army. And you're going to see they're going to use these sepoys. They're going to ship them off to other colonies to work. The British are pretty smart about this. They do not let an Indian soldier serve in his home district. Think about that a second. Why would you do that? Why would you not let him work in his home district? Well, if you need him to shoot somebody or be rough somebody up or be brutal, do you think he's going to be brutal to his own cousins? No, it's not likely. Not likely. So you send him off to South Africa, another part of India where he has no connection. He does not think of these as people, the ethnic people of his same ethnic group. Sorry about that. And so it's pretty easy. They love the uniforms. They love the pay. Describe the racial divide in India and Java. What I'm talking about there is the racial divide between the conquerors, or the colonizers, the Europeans, and the indigenous people, the people who are native to that area. Their society did have racial discrimination in those places. But obviously, the colonizers saw themselves as above the indigenous people. But also, at least initially, there was some intermarriage between Europeans and indigenous people. Obviously, that was men marrying indigenous women. When the European women arrive in the colonies, that's all going to change, because those European women are going to be like, my man's not seeing one of those women. I'm not putting up with that. Okay. And eventually the two groups will drift apart. All right. So, social reform in the colonies. The British do try to institute some reforms in India, and they're not totally successful. One of the things they push for is they push for expansion of education, particularly with the upper classes. They don't really care about educating the common people, but they do want to educate some of the top level people because you might say, well, why would they do that? Because they need help running India. All right, Britain is too small to run India all by itself. It needs help of local educated bureaucrats. Okay. Number two, they're going to try to get them language reform, particularly get them to speak English and the scientific language. There will be an infusion of Western technology. And one of the things they'll attempt to do, not totally successful at first, is get rid of sati. Sati is the picture I've got there. You remember that, I'm sure, from last year. It's one of the signs of the patriarchal nature of India. The fact that upper class women, when their husband died, they were supposed to throw themselves on his cremation fire. I know your first question is, were they still alive when they did this? Yes. Yes. There are even stories of a few families having to force the women. I'm sure some of the women had to be forced, but there's stories of in-laws, his family, throwing her into her husband's cremation fire. Yeah, pretty rough. All right. What kind of changes resulted in some places like India? Western ideas make their way in. There is a move towards Western styles of education, technology. India is drawn deeper into the global trade network. At schools, they'll kind of model themselves off European schools, follow European phys ed, reading, scientific knowledge. Ironically, though, these people they educate, remember the ones they needed to help run the government? They're going to be the ones who lead the Indian independence movement. And we're going to see a difference here when Europeans go to Africa a little later, after they've already been in India. When they go to Africa in the late 1800s, they will decide they're not going to educate many of the locals because of what happened in India. India, the educated, are the ones who fight back. All right. So, what are the reasons / motives for colonial expansion? Why do they want this imperialization? Why do they want to go get colonies in India and Southeast Asia and later Africa and China? Number one, you want to be status as a great global power. Everybody wants to be the one with the most colonies because that is a sign of prestige. Number two, they want raw materials out of the colonies. All right? They'd like raw materials. They'd like rubber from Central Africa. They'd like cotton from India. They would like, now,